Believing the open road promises freedom is the most dangerous lie ever whispered into the human heart. I have seen the truth in the reflection of a shattered rearview mirror, a vision of asphalt that doesn't lead to new horizons, but coils back on itself like a serpent devouring its own tail. It is not a journey outward, but a descent inward into the cold, silent places we try to outrun. The hum of the engine is a lullaby for the damned, and the white lines on the pavement are the bars of a cage you willingly drive into, a cage whose walls are the endless horizon, and whose ceiling is a starless, watching sky. Forget what you think you know about adventure. Tonight, we peel back the sun-bleached map and look at the veins of dried blood that stain the routes you so eagerly follow. For every mile marker is a tombstone for a soul who thought they were just passing through. The first story I must share with you is not a story. It is a premonition, an echo caught in the amber of twilight. It begins, as these things so often do, with a simple choice. A man, let's call him Arthur, decided to drive through the night to outrun a storm, both in the sky and in his own heart. The asphalt stretched before him like a strip of black velvet, utterly empty. For the first hour, there was only the drone of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires, a mechanical heartbeat in the vast, silent chest of the desert. She felt a sense of mastery, of solitude, but the universe abhors a vacuum, and the empty road was a stage waiting for its actor. It began as a flicker, a trick of the tired eye, a glint of light in his mirror. He dismissed it at first, a reflection of a distant, unseen star, perhaps, or another traveler, so far behind as to be insignificant. But the light did not fade. It grew, slowly, patiently, resolving itself into 2 pinpricks of light. He felt a brief, irrational flicker of annoyance at his solitude being broken, but then a deeper, colder feeling began to coil in his stomach. The lights were gaining on him, but not with the aggressive speed of an impatient driver. They maintained a perfect distance, a predator's pace, just close enough to be a constant presence in his mirror, a shadow clinging to his heels. He sped up slightly, and the lights matched his pace instantly. He slowed down, and they slowed with him, a perfect, mocking echo of his every move. The road was still a straight, unwavering line, offering no turns, no exits, no escape. Arthur's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. The vehicle behind him was a void, a shape of pure darkness that drank the moonlight, its form impossible to discern beyond the 2 piercing beams of its headlights. They were not the warm yellow glow of halogen lamps. They were a cold, sterile white, like the eyes of a deep-sea creature, devoid of warmth or life. They didn't illuminate the road. They seemed to dissect it, to pin him in their gaze. He felt scrutinized, judged. The simple act of driving, of moving forward, became an ordeal. Every glance in the mirror was a fresh wave of dread. The silence in his car was no longer peaceful. It was the suffocating silence of a tomb. He tried to reason with himself. It's just another driver, perhaps a state trooper running a check, or someone as weary as he was, locking onto his taillights as a guide through the hypnotic darkness. But the stillness of its pursuit felt wrong. There was no wavering, no human imperfection in its driving. It was as if the car was not being driven, but was an extension of the road itself, a piece of the darkness that had peeled itself away to give chase. He fumbled with his radio, desperate for a human voice, for any sound to break the spell. The dial swept through frequencies, finding only static, a hiss like 1,000 whispering voices, each one repeating his own name in a chorus of decay. The cold in his stomach was now a block of ice, spreading through his veins, a frozen terror that had nothing to do with the desert night. The first sign of a curve in the road appeared ahead. A slow, gentle bend. This was his chance. He would see the car from the side, identify it, break the illusion of this faceless pursuer. The dread fought with a desperate hope in his chest. As he entered the turn, he fixed his eyes on the rearview mirror, waiting. The headlights behind him began their own turn, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping second, the side of the vehicle should have been visible, but there was nothing, only the two lights, suspended in the blackness, turning as if they were unattached to any physical body. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, like two malevolent stars arcing through the void. The illusion was shattered, replaced by an even more terrifying reality. This was not a car, it was something else. Panic, raw and absolute, seized him. He stomped on the accelerator, the engine screaming in protest as the car lurched forward. The needle on the speedometer climbed past 90, then 100. The desert landscape became a blur, a smear of gray and black at the edge of his vision. But the lights in his mirror did not shrink. They did not fall behind. They remained, fixed in place, an unwavering judgment in the glass. He was a mouse on a wheel, running faster and faster, but going nowhere. The road itself felt like it was stretching before him, the distance to the next town elongating into an impossible, infinite line. The two white eyes in his mirror were the only constant in a world that was dissolving into speed and fear. He was no longer driving to a destination, he was simply fleeing. And this is where the truth begins to curdle, for the road is not merely a path, but a conduit for energies we cannot comprehend. What follows a soul on that lonely stretch of asphalt is often a reflection of what it is running from. Arthur was fleeing a broken home, a life shattered by his own hands. The faceless pursuer was his own regret, given form by the strange alchemy of the night. The headlights were the eyes of his own conscience, a gaze from which there is no escape. He could drive until the engine turned to ash and the tires melted into the pavement, but he could never outrun the shadow he cast behind him. The car was a phantom, born of his own heart, a truth far more chilling than any monster of flesh and blood. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Some shadows cling tighter than others. The whispers from beyond tell me that for hours he drove like a man possessed, his sanity fraying with every mile. The fuel gauge began its slow, inevitable descent toward empty, a countdown to his doom. The thought of stopping, of being a stationary target for that thing, was more than he could bear. He saw a flicker of light ahead, not the cold dead light in his mirror, but the warm inviting glow of civilization, a gas station, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. With a sob of relief, he swerved off the highway, his tires screeching as he pulled up to the pumps. He risked a glance in the mirror. The highway behind him was empty, utterly, completely empty. The lights were gone. The silence that descended was somehow more terrifying than the pursuit itself. He sat there for a long moment, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Was it over? Had he imagined it all, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and grief? He stumbled out of the car, the cool night air a shock to his skin. The gas station was old, one of those forgotten relics of a bygone era, with a single buzzing fluorescent light that cast long, dancing shadows. An old man with eyes like cracked glass sat behind the counter, not moving, not even seeming to breathe. Arthur paid for the gas in a daze, his hands shaking so violently he could barely handle the money. He didn't dare speak of what he had seen. How could he? How could he explain that the darkness itself had hunted him across the desert? With a full tank of gas and a fragile temporary sense of safety, he pulled back onto the highway. He told himself it was a waking nightmare, a fever dream of the road. He drove for 10, then 20 minutes, the mirror remaining blessedly, beautifully empty. The fear began to recede, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. He was safe. It was over. And then, a flicker, a single glint of light, miles behind him, but unmistakable. His blood ran cold. It had not given up. It had waited. It was patient. This time, there was no panic, no frantic acceleration. There was only a hollow, soul-crushing despair. He understood then. This was his fate. This was his penance. To be eternally pursued by the ghost of his own making. A journey with no end. On a road paved with his own sorrow. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your presence here gives strength to these warnings, ensuring they reach those who wander too close to the edge. The second vision I have for you tonight is one not of pursuit, but of infiltration. It concerns a young woman named Clara, a musician traveling from one dead-end gig to another, her car filled with instruments and shattered dreams. The road was her only constant companion, and the radio her only confidant. She believed in the power of music, in the ability of a melody to ward off the encroaching silence of a lonely life. She did not understand that some silences are not empty, they are listening, and some frequencies carry more than just songs. They carry an invitation. She was driving through the dense, fog-shrouded forests of the Pacific Northwest, a place where the trees grow tall and close together, swallowing the sky. Her radio, usually a reliable source of classic rock, began to falter. The signal dissolved into a shower of static, a sound like cicadas screaming at the world's end. Annoyed, she began to fiddle with the dial, searching for a clear station. But as she swept through the frequencies, she found nothing but that same persistent hiss. Then through the static, a voice. It was faint at first, a mere fragment of a word, like a voice from a great distance. She leaned closer, straining to hear, her curiosity overpowering the nascent dread that was beginning to prickle at the back of her neck. It was a man's voice, calm and melodic. The voice was not reading news or playing a character in a radio drama. It was speaking directly to her. It said, "We know you're listening, Clara." A jolt of pure ice shot through her. It was impossible. A prank? A pirate radio station? She tried to change the station, but the dial was stuck. The voice continued, its tone intimate, as if it were sitting in the passenger seat beside her. It spoke of her childhood, of a forgotten promise she made under a willow tree. It described the worn-out frets on her guitar, the one she never showed anyone. It whispered the name of the lover who had broken her heart, a name she hadn't uttered in years. The static swirled around the voice, no longer a random noise, but a conscious, living thing. Her car had become a confessional, and the voice was her priest, her accuser, and her judge. Every secret she had ever guarded, every shame she had ever buried, was being laid bare in the cold, impersonal space of her vehicle. The voice wasn't cruel. That was the most terrifying part. It was gentle, understanding, almost sympathetic. It spoke of her loneliness, of her fear of failure, with a tenderness that made her skin crawl. It was a violation of the most profound kind, a stripping away of her very soul, broadcast through the rusted speakers of her beat-up sedan. She tried to turn the radio off, but the knob came loose in her hand. The voice only grew louder, its melodic cadence filling every inch of the car, vibrating in her teeth, in her bones. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows, isolating her completely. The true horror of the situation settled upon her, not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, creeping dawn. The entity speaking to her was not human. It was something ascient, something that fed on the quiet desperation of lonely travelers. The radio waves were its hunting ground, the static its camouflage. The road had led her into its web, and her own vulnerability had been the bait. The voice began to make suggestions, small at first. "There's a turn-off ahead, Clara. No one would ever find you there." It painted pictures of peace, of an end to the struggle, of a final, perfect silence. The melodic voice was a siren's song, promising release, but leading only to oblivion. It was the whisper of the void, given a silver tongue by the car's electronics. She began to weep, not from fear anymore, but from a terrifying sense of recognition. A part of her, the exhausted, broken part, was listening to the voice. It was tempted by its promises. The struggle was no longer against the entity in the radio, but against the darkness within herself that was responding to its call. The car, her sanctuary, had become a cage, and the voice was the key master, offering to unlock a door she knew she must never open. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles aching, focusing on the faint painted line on the road, the only thing that tethered her to reality. The voice whispered on, a sweet poison dripping into her ear, promising an end to the long, lonely road. But she knew, with chilling certainty, that the destination it offered was a place from which no traveler ever returns. What many fail to understand is that our machines, our tools of convenience, are not dead things. They are vessels. They carry our hopes, our frustrations, and sometimes they pick up echoes of other things that drift on the currents of the world. Clara's radio did not simply find a strange signal. It became a conduit. The loneliness she projected into the world acted as a tuning fork, resonating with a frequency of despair that is always broadcasting, always waiting for a receiver. The entity was a parasite of the soul, and her car was the host. The most chilling part of my vision is this: the voice never stopped. Even after she ran out of gas and fled the car on foot, she could still hear it, a faint melodic whisper on the wind, calling her name. Our journey into the shadows continues, moving from the open road to the places that offer false sanctuary. Consider the rest stop, a place of glaring lights, lukewarm coffee, and transient humanity. It is meant to be a pause, a moment of respite on a long journey. But some of these places are not pauses. They are traps. They are wounds in the landscape that never heal, where the residue of past tragedies lingers like a foul odor. Our third story is about such a place, a rest stop that appeared on no map, a stain on the fabric of reality. A young couple, Mark and Jenna, were driving cross-country, their future bright and their spirits high, but they made a fatal error. They ignored the omens: a dead crow on the road, a cracked windshield, a sudden, inexplicable chill in the air. They pulled into the rest stop just after midnight. It was eerily clean, the concrete almost white under the stark, buzzing lights. The only other vehicle in the lot was a vintage sedan, a model from 50 years ago, pristine, as if it had just rolled off the assembly line. Inside the main building, the vending machines hummed, and the air was still, but the people were wrong. A woman in a dated dress stared at a travel brochure with unblinking eyes. A man in a suit stood by the payphone, the receiver to his ear, but his mouth never moved. A family sat at a table, their smiles fixed and glassy, their food untouched. They were all there, yet they seemed to occupy a different slice of time. Mark and Jenna felt an immediate, prickling sense of unease. They tried to be polite, nodding to the other patrons, but received no acknowledgement. It was like they were ghosts, invisible to the strange, silent inhabitants of the rest stop. Jenna went to the restroom, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw the woman in the dated dress standing behind her, her reflection staring back with eyes full of a terrible, ancient sorrow. But when Jenna spun around, the restroom was empty. The cold dread intensified. This place was not just strange, it was fundamentally broken. The laws of physics, of cause and effect, seemed thin and frayed here. The air itself felt heavy, saturated with unspoken grief. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your presence here is a testament against the silence. They decided to leave immediately, their need for rest forgotten, replaced by a primal urge to flee. As they walked back to their car, Mark glanced at the vintage sedan. Inside, he could see the family from the table, still smiling their vacant, painted smiles, not moving a muscle. He realized with a sickening lurch that they were the same family depicted on a faded, yellowed, missing poster he had seen tacked to the bulletin board inside. The poster was dated 1973. They had pulled into this rest stop and had never, ever left. They were echoes, trapped in the last moments of their lives, replaying their final pause for eternity. And the rest stop itself was a museum of these captured moments. As they scrambled into their own car, the engine turning over with a reassuring roar, they saw the other patrons of the rest stop for what they truly were. The man at the payphone was waiting for a call that would never come, a call telling him his family had died in a crash just miles down the road. The woman with the brochure was planning a vacation she would never take, her life cut short by a sudden violent illness in that very building. They were all specters, held in place by the gravity of their own unfinished stories. This was not a place of rest. It was a place of eternal waiting, a purgatory of formica tables and stale coffee. The building was a scar, and they were the ghosts of the wound. They peeled out of the parking lot, not daring to look back. The image of the glassy-eyed family burned into their minds. The rest stop was not a physical location you could find on a map. It was a psychic anomaly, a fold in time that only appeared to those who were themselves at a crossroads, those who were vulnerable. It manifested for the lost, for the weary, for those who needed to stop. And once you entered, you risked becoming part of the collection. The whispers from the other side tell me that the rest stop is still out there, waiting. It changes its appearance, its location, but its purpose remains the same: to collect the souls who stray too far from the marked path. This brings us to our fourth tale, a warning scrawled in dried blood on the back of a forgotten map. It is about the lure of the shortcut. Humanity is always seeking an easier path, a quicker way, but some roads are hidden for a reason. They are not meant to be traveled by the living. A salesman named David, desperate to make it to a meeting, was running desperately late. A GPS error had sent him down a labyrinth of country roads, and he was losing precious time. He pulled over, frustration boiling in his gut, and consulted an old paper map he kept in his glove compartment. There, he saw it, a thin, red line, unmarked by any number or name, that cut straight through a vast, dark forest, promising to shave hours off his journey. It was a fool's hope, but he was a desperate man. He found the turnoff exactly where the map indicated. It was little more than a dirt track, flanked by ancient, menacing trees, whose branches knitted together overhead, blocking out the sun. The air grew instantly colder as he drove onto the path. The sounds of the modern world, the distant hum of traffic, the cry of birds, vanished, replaced by a profound, listening silence. The road was rough, jarring the car, but it was straight, just as the map had promised. For a while, a sense of clever triumph filled him. He had beaten the system, found the secret way. He did not yet understand that the road itself was the system, and it had its own set of rules, its own currency, its own unforgiving toll. The first toll was his sense of direction. After what felt like an hour, he should have been nearing the main highway again, but the forest only grew thicker, the trees more gnarled and ancient. His compass spun uselessly, and his phone had lost its signal miles ago. The road, which had been so straight, began to curve, to twist back on itself. He passed a uniquely shaped, lightning-scarred oak tree, and then 20 minutes later, he passed it again. A cold knot of fear tightened in his stomach. The road was not a line, it was a circle, a loop. He was trapped within the woods, a rat in a maze from which there was no escape. The shortcut was not a path through the forest, but a path into it. The second toll was his hope. As dusk began to bleed through the dense canopy, casting the woods in shades of purple and black, his car sputtered and died. The gas tank was empty, though he was certain it had been half full. It was as if the road itself had drunk the fuel, feeding on his desperation. He was stranded. He got out of the car, the silence of the forest pressing in on him, so total it felt like a physical weight. There were no crickets, no rustling leaves, only the sound of his own frantic heartbeat. And then he heard it, a whisper carried on the wind, a sound that seemed to come from the trees themselves. They were whispering his name. The forest was alive, and it was aware of him. It had been waiting. The final toll was his sanity. As darkness consumed the forest, he saw them, shapes moving between the trees, tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed with a faint, phosphorescent light. They were the guardians of this road, the ones who collected the price from all who dared to use their path. They did not rush him. They simply watched, their silent, hungry gaze following his every panicked move. He understood then the nature of the transaction. The road offered a shortcut, not through space, but through life. It took you to your final destination with terrifying efficiency. The salesman's meeting was forgotten. The only appointment he had left to keep was with the ancient, whispering things that called this forest their home. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Some paths are better left untraveled. The truth of that shortcut is an ancient one, known to those who can read the ley lines of the earth. These paths are not made of dirt and stone. They are veins of psychic energy. They exist outside of normal time and space. To travel them is to make a pact with the land itself, and the land is a jealous god. It demands an offering. David offered his desperation, and the forest accepted his payment in full. He was never seen again, but those who are sensitive, those who are foolish enough to seek out that same thin red line on a map, say that on moonless nights, you can sometimes see a new shape standing among the trees, tall and gaunt, its eyes glowing with a faint captured light. He is a guardian now, another eternal toll collector on the road to nowhere. Our fifth story plucks a different string on the harp of dread. It speaks of the oldest and most dangerous temptation on a lonely road, the act of mercy. It is the story of a truck driver, a man we will call Gus, who had spent 30 years on the highways. He had seen it all, or so he thought. He had a strict rule: never pick up hitchhikers. It was a rule born of caution and common sense. But one night, in the pouring rain, he saw a figure on the side of the road, a young woman soaked to the bone, her face pale and desperate in his headlights. Against his better judgment, against the screaming instinct in his gut, he pulled over. He broke his one rule, and in doing so, he sealed his fate. The woman climbed into his cab without a word, water pooling on the floor mat. She was young, no older than 20, and she shivered violently. Whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. He offered her his coat and a thermos of hot coffee, his guilt for almost driving past her overriding his suspicion. She accepted them with a small, grateful nod. He asked her where she was headed, and she just pointed a trembling finger down the road. "Just forward," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. Gus felt a pang of fatherly pity. He decided he would take her to the next town, get her a warm meal and a room for the night. It was the least he could do. He was a good man, after all. They drove in silence for miles, the only sounds the relentless drumming of the rain and the rhythmic swoosh of the windshield wipers. Gus tried to make small talk, to ease the tension, but her answers were short, evasive. An unsettling stillness settled over her. The shivering stopped, and a strange, cold calm seemed to emanate from her side of the cab. He glanced over and saw that her eyes were fixed on him, her gaze unnervingly intense, ancient. The pity he had felt began to curdle into a primal fear. This was no lost girl. This was something else entirely. The rain intensified, lashing against the truck, the wind howling like a hungry wolf. The road ahead was a river of darkness. "You're a good man, Gus," she said suddenly, her voice no longer a whisper but a clear, cold bell tone that cut through the noise of the storm. "You have a kind heart." He didn't know how she knew his name. He never told her. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. "Most people just drive by," she continued, her eyes never leaving his face. "They are wise. They know not to interfere. But you stopped, and now you have to take my place." He didn't understand. He asked her what she meant. She smiled then, a smile that did not touch her eyes, a smile of infinite sadness and terrifying purpose. "Someone has to wait on this road," she said. "My watch is over. Yours is just beginning." In that instant, Gus understood. He was not giving her a ride. He was receiving a curse. She was a ghost, a spirit bound to that stretch of highway, forever seeking a replacement. His act of kindness was not a rescue. It was an acceptance of her burden. He saw it all in her ancient eyes, the crash that had killed her decades ago, the endless, lonely vigil in the rain, the countless cars that had passed her by. He had been the one foolish enough, or kind enough, to stop. As the truck approached the very spot where he had picked her up, she began to fade, her form becoming translucent, her voice a dying echo. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. The passenger door swung open, and the storm flooded the cab. Gus slammed on the brakes, the truck jack knifing across the wet asphalt. He sat there for an hour, trembling, the cold rain soaking him to the bone. His mind fractured. When he finally regained control, he was a changed man. The kindness in his heart had been replaced by a cold, hard stone of terror. He drove on, but he was no longer just a truck driver. He was a prisoner, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than any storm, that one day he would find himself standing on the side of that very road, soaked to the bone, his face pale in the headlights of an approaching vehicle, waiting for another kind soul to break their own rules. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness, "Do not let these omens be in vain." Let us now turn our gaze from the road itself to the temporary shelters that line its edges, the lonely motels, those flickering neon promises of rest for the weary. But rest is a commodity, and sometimes the price is far too high. Our sixth narrative is a stain on the guest ledger of such a place. A traveling photographer, a woman named Eleanor, checked into the Starlight Motel, a forgotten establishment where the paint was peeling and the stars in the sign were mostly burnt out. She was given room 7. The air inside was stale, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten nights. She ignored the rust-colored stain on the carpet and the feeling of being watched. She was tired, and all she wanted was sleep. She set up her equipment, her gaze falling on the large, ornate mirror that hung on the wall opposite the bed. It was old, its silvering tarnished at the edges, giving it the look of a clouded pond. As she unpacked, she caught her reflection in the glass and froze. For a split second, her reflection had not been her own. It had been a man, his face contorted in a silent scream, his hands clutching at his chest. She blinked, and the image was gone, replaced by her own startled face. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, a symptom of her exhaustion, but the image was seared into her mind, a seed of dread planted in the fertile soil of the motel's oppressive atmosphere. She tried to sleep, but the room was not quiet. She heard whispers in the walls, the faint sound of weeping from the adjoining room, which she knew was empty. She felt a palpable cold spot near the bed, a pocket of unnatural chill that made the hair on her arms stand on end. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the screaming man from the mirror. Sleep would not come. Defeated, she turned on the light and decided to work, to distract herself. She sat on the bed, facing the mirror, and began cleaning her camera lenses. And then she saw it again. Her reflection flickered like a faulty television screen, and for a longer moment, this time, she saw him. The man older now, his face a mask of despair, pacing the length of the room behind her reflection. He wasn't just an image, he was an echo, a memory trapped in the silver of the glass. The mirror was not a reflector of the present, but a window into the past. It was a silent witness, and it held the final moments of those who had stayed in room 7 before her. She watched in horrified fascination as the scene played out in the mirror. She saw the man receive a phone call, saw his face crumble with grief. She saw him sit on the edge of the bed where she now sat, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The mirror was showing her a story, a tragedy that had soaked into the very fabric of the room. This was not a haunting in the traditional sense. It was something far more intimate, far more invasive. The reflection showed the man getting up, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked to his suitcase and removed a small, dark object. Eleanor's heart stopped. She knew what was coming. The mirror man raised the gun to his head. Her own reflection stared back at her from within the scene, a helpless, terrified ghost from the future, unable to intervene. The silent scream she had seen earlier was his last moment, captured and replayed for any who dared to look too closely into the glass. The mirror was a broken cross, a symbol of faith shattered by despair, and it held the stain of that final, irreversible act. She understood now the rust-colored stain on the carpet was not rust, it was dried blood. She fled the room, leaving her belongings behind, her own scream finally tearing from her throat. The night manager, a creature as old and faded as the motel itself, simply nodded when she babbled her story, his eyes holding no surprise. "The mirror remembers," was all he said. "It always remembers." Eleanor never stopped driving that night. The vision from beyond is clear. Some objects, some places, become saturated with strong emotion. A mirror, by its very nature, is a soul catcher. It reflects our vanity, our sorrow, our secrets, and some, like the one in room 7, learn to hold on to those secrets, replaying them for the next unfortunate guest, a silent, eternal warning that some reflections are truths you can never unsee. The arteries of this country are its highways, and the blood cells are the great trucks that thunder down them day and night. They carry the goods that sustain us, the materials of our lives, but sometimes they carry other things, things not meant for the light of day. Our seventh story is one such cargo, a tale whispered in truck stops and greasy spoons, a legend among the men who drive the lonely miles. It is the story of a driver named Allah, a veteran of the road, who took a job that was too good to be true. The pay was triple the usual rate. The cargo was a single, sealed shipping container. The instructions were simple: drive from one coast to the other, do not stop for anything but fuel, and under no circumstances open the container. Al was a practical man, not given to flights of fancy. He assumed it was something illegal, drugs, weapons, something he was better off not knowing about. The money was too good to pass up. He took the job. The first day was uneventful. The container was heavy, the truck handled well, and the miles rolled by under a placid blue sky. He felt the familiar rhythm of the road, the soothing hum of the diesel engine. But as night fell, a sense of unease began to creep in. The container, which had been silent, began to make noises. It started as a faint, rhythmic thumping, a sound he tried to dismiss as the cargo shifting, but the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. It sounded like a slow, heavy heartbeat. He turned up the radio, trying to drown it out, but the thumping seemed to pulse through the very frame of the truck, a bass note of dread he could feel in his bones. He remembered the warning, do not stop. He gripped the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, trying to ignore the impossible sound coming from behind him. As the night wore on, the thumping was joined by another sound, a scratching, the sound of fingernails dragging slowly, deliberately, across the inside of the metal container. The sound was methodical, relentless, and it sent a wave of pure, undiluted terror through him. What was in there? What kind of animal made a sound like that? But a deeper, darker part of him knew this was no animal. The scratching stopped, and a new sound began. A voice. It was a low, mournful whisper, so faint he thought he was imagining it, but it grew in strength, resolving itself into a single sorrowful word, repeated over and over. Cold, so cold. It was the voice of a woman, a voice filled with an eternity of suffering. Al's blood turned to ice water in his veins. He was hauling a coffin, a tomb, but the thing inside was not dead. It was aware, it was suffering, and it was speaking to him. The voice grew more insistent, pleading with him, begging him to open the door, to let it out, to share its warmth. It promised him rewards, secrets, anything he desired. He was a practical man, but no amount of practicality could explain this. He was trapped in a rolling nightmare, chained to a haunted box. The whispers from the container became more personal, more seductive. It spoke of his ex-wife, of the money he owed, of the loneliness that gnawed at him during the long nights on the road. It knew him. It had been listening to his thoughts, his quiet desperations, his secret shames. The cargo was not just a physical object. It was a psychic predator, and it was trying to wear him down, to break his will. His resolve to follow the instructions was at war with the mounting terror and the siren song of the voice. To stop was to be caught. To open the container was to unleash what he didn't dare to imagine. He just drove, a man fleeing from his own cargo. The whispers tell me the truth of that container. It did not hold a person or a creature. It held an echo, the echo of a terrible crime, an entity born of a violent, unjust death. It was a nexus of pure, concentrated misery, given a voice by the solitude of the road. It fed on the fear, of those who transported it. Al, in his simple greed, had become the keeper of a ghost, the ferryman for a damned soul. The company that hired him knew this. They were not transporting an object, but transferring a curse, passing it from one unfortunate driver to the next. The final vision I have of Al is of him at a desolate truck stop, staring at the sealed doors of the container, his hand on the latch, the whispers from inside promising an end to the cold. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Some burdens are not meant to be carried. We journey now from the main highways to the forgotten backwaters, the small towns that dot the landscape like faded ink spots on an old map. These places have their own rules, their own secrets. Outsiders are not welcome, not because the people are unfriendly, but because their very existence is a secret that must be kept. Our 8th story is of such a town, a place lost in the heartland, a town that sleep forgot. A young journalist named Sarah, chasing a story on vanishing rural communities, followed a lead down a road that wasn't on her map. She found the town of Havenwood. At first glance, it was idyllic, perfectly manicured lawns, quaint houses, a Rockwell painting come to life. But something was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. The people were all out, working in their gardens, chatting on street corners, children playing in the parks. But their movements were slow, slightly jerky, like marionettes on a string, and their eyes were wide open, fixed in a glassy, unwavering stare. They never blinked, not once. Sarah watched for 20 minutes, a cold dread coiling in her gut, as not a single person in the entire town blinked. They smiled, they talked, they moved, but their eyes remained open, unseeing, like the eyes of porcelain dolls. The air of peacefulness she had first felt was revealed to be a horrifying stillness, the stillness of a held breath that would never be released. She tried to interact with them, to ask for directions, to interview them for her story. They would respond, their voices flat and monotone, their smiles never reaching their wide, staring eyes. Their answers were vague, circular, filled with pleasantries that meant nothing. They spoke of the town's peace, its tranquility, how they never wanted to leave. When she asked them about the last time they had slept, they would simply tilt their heads, their fixed smiles unwavering, and change the subject. Sleep was a foreign concept here, a word without meaning. The children played with a silent, joyless intensity, their games repeating in an endless, unblinking loop. The town was a clockwork mechanism, and its people were the gears, forever turning, but going nowhere. As night fell, Sarah expected the town to shut down, for the people to retreat into their homes, but they did not. The lights in the houses came on, but the people remained outside, standing in their yards, on their porches, simply staring into the darkness with those same wide, unblinking eyes. A collective, silent vigil against a foe she could not see. She checked into the town's only inn, the door opened by a woman whose fixed smile was a rictus of horror. The room was clean, but there was no bed, only a hard wooden chair facing the window. She understood then. In Havenwood, you did not sleep. You watched, you waited. The truth of Havenwood, whispered to me on a cold, cosmic wind, is that the town had made a pact. Decades ago, a blight had fallen upon them, a sleeping sickness that no one could survive. In their desperation, they had prayed to something that answered from the deep, dark places between the stars. It offered them a cure, a way to live. The price was simple. They would never have to sleep again, but in giving up sleep, they had given up their dreams, their rest, their souls. They were no longer human. They were empty vessels, animated husks, their consciousness worn thin by decades of unending waking life. And the thing they watched for in the night was their patron, their jailer, the entity that had granted their wish and now owned their eternal, sleepless vigil. Sarah barricaded the door to her room, her journalistic curiosity replaced by a desperate need to survive. She knew that to fall asleep in this town was the ultimate sin. To close your eyes was to break the pact, and she did not want to know what punishment the unblinking residents of Havenwood would inflict upon such a heretic. She spent the entire night in that hard wooden chair, her own eyes burning with exhaustion, forcing them to stay open, watching the silent, staring figures in the town square below. She had come seeking a story about a dying town, but she had found a town that could not die, a town trapped in a perpetual waking nightmare. Her greatest fear was no longer the townspeople, but the insidious heavy pull of her own eyelids. Let us now travel down a road, marked not by signs, but by omens, a road where the natural world has been twisted into a messenger of doom. This is our 9th tale, the story of the Crow's Road. Two brothers, Liam and Sean, were on a pilgrimage to their estranged father's deathbed, a journey fraught with regret and unspoken anger. They were driving through a desolate, flat landscape where the sky was a vast, empty canvas of grey. It was on this stretch of highway that they began to see the crows. At first it was just a few, perched on a fence post, their black eyes following the car, but soon there were more. Dozens, then hundreds. They covered every telephone wire, every road sign, a silent, feathered army of obsidian. The crows were not behaving normally. They were utterly silent. No cawing, no chatter. They simply watched, their heads tilting in unison as the car passed. Every sign they approached, mile markers, exit signs, warnings, was completely obscured by a thick blanket of black birds, their bodies pressed together, rendering the information unreadable. It was a deliberate, intelligent act. The crows were blinding them, forcing them to drive without guidance, without knowledge of where they were or where they were going. Liam, the driver, felt a growing sense of claustrophobia, as if the vast, open landscape was shrinking around them. The crows drawing a cage of black feathers around their car. Sean, more superstitious, began to panic. He saw it as a terrible omen, a sign that they should turn back. Crows were psychopomps, guides for the souls of the dead. What did it mean when the guides refused to show you the way, when they actively blocked your path? Liam, ever the rationalist, dismissed it as a strange but natural phenomenon, a migratory flock perhaps. But even he couldn't deny the chilling intentionality of their behavior. When they came to a fork in the road, both signs were completely covered. They had to choose a path, blind. Liam, in his frustration, chose the left fork. As they drove down the new road, half the crows from the fork took to the air, a silent swirling vortex of black, and began to follow them. The road grew narrower, the pavement cracking and giving way to gravel. The landscape became more desolate, the few skeletal trees they passed also laden with their silent, winged audience. The crows that followed them began to land on the road ahead of the car, forcing Liam to slow down, to swerve. They were not just watching anymore, they were herding them, guiding them toward a destination of their own choosing. The sun began to set, painting the grey sky in bloody strokes of orange and red, and the crows on the road ahead seemed to melt into the growing shadows. Fear, cold and absolute, finally took root in Liam's heart. This was not nature, this was a message, a verdict. The road ended abruptly at a cliff's edge, overlooking a churning, grey sea, trapped. As they looked back, the road behind them was a solid, living river of black crows, blocking any retreat. The birds that had been following them settled on the car, their weight a palpable presence, their sharp talons scratching at the paint. They were surrounded, enveloped by a silent, feathered judgment. In the distance, across the sea, they saw a single, faint light, the island where their father lay dying. They understood then. The crows were not trying to harm them. They were delivering a message from their father's fading spirit, a message of anger and unforgiveness. They had waited too long. The road to reconciliation was closed. They were being told, in no uncertain terms, that they were not welcome. The crows were the guardians of his final passage, and they had been judged unworthy to witness it. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Heed these signs, for the universe rarely speaks so plainly. The final vision I have to share is the most intimate, the most disturbing. It is a story that turns the mirror, not on the road, but on the driver. It is about the terror of meeting oneself, and the realization that the greatest monster we can encounter is the one that sits behind our own eyes. This is the story of a man named Thomas, driving home late one night through a torrential, apocalyptic rainstorm. The world beyond his windshield was a wash of black and silver, the road barely visible. He was tired, his mind numb from the long hours behind the wheel. The journey was a hypnotic, disorienting experience. The rain and the darkness blurring the lines between the world and his own weary consciousness. Through the sheets of rain, he saw a pair of hazard lights flashing weakly up ahead, a stalled car. His first instinct was to drive on, to lose himself in the anonymity of the storm. But a nagging sense of duty, a flicker of human decency, made him slow down. It was a dangerous night to be stranded. He pulled up behind the car, his own headlights cutting through the deluge, illuminating the vehicle. His breath caught in his throat. It was his car, the exact same make, model, and color, a dark blue sedan, just like his own. He stared, confused, trying to make sense of it. A coincidence, an unbelievable, statistically impossible coincidence. He told himself it had to be. He got out of his car, the cold rain soaking him instantly, and approached the driver's side window of the stored vehicle. The windows were fogged over, obscuring the person inside. He tapped on the glass. There was no response. He tapped again, harder this time, shouting over the roar of the storm. Slowly, a hand came up and wiped a patch of condensation from the inside of the window. A face peered out, and Thomas felt the world fall away beneath his feet. He was looking at himself, his own face, his own eyes, his own rain-matted hair, but his double's face was a mask of sheer, abject terror, his eyes wide with a horror that transcended sanity. The man in the car, his other self, screamed, a silent, desperate scream that was swallowed by the storm. He was pointing a trembling finger, not at Thomas, but at something behind him. Thomas spun around, his heart seizing in his chest. His own car, the one he had just exited, was empty, but in the passenger seat, a shape was beginning to form out of the shadows. A tall, gaunt figure, its limbs too long, its face a blur of shifting darkness. It was the thing he had been driving with, the thing he had not seen, had not been aware of, until he stepped outside and looked back in. The thing his terrified doppelganger had been trying to warn him about. He understood the horrifying truth in a flash of lightning that split the sky. This was not a coincidence. This was a loop, a temporal trap. The road on this storm-tossed night had become a cracked mirror, showing him his own immediate terrible future. He was the man who would pull over to help. The other car was his own. Moments from now, after the thing in his passenger seat had revealed itself, he was looking at his own impending doom. The terror on his double's face was the terror he was about to experience. The stalled car was not broken. It was paralyzed by fear, and by pulling over, By getting out, he had sealed his own fate, completing the circle. He had delivered himself to the entity that was waiting patiently for him in his own car. The whispers from beyond tell a chilling final truth about this encounter. The entity in the car was a hitchhiker of a different sort. It doesn't stand on the side of the road. It materializes in the blind spots of your perception. In the passenger seat you think is empty during long hypnotic drives. It is born of the road's lonely madness. It is the fear of the journey given form. Thomas's story is a warning that sometimes the most dangerous part of any road trip is the moment you are forced to stop and see who or what has been traveling with you all along. The open road is not a promise of freedom. It is a canvas, and upon it, our deepest fears will always find a way to paint themselves. The asphalt remembers every soul that passes over it, and in the deep of night, it sometimes decides to show you the ghosts you brought with you. May the shadows keep you safe until the next vision.